Dragon Emperor Sun Chapter 461 to Chapter 470. David smiled lightly. Whatever, what I want, I don't have it here. What do you mean? Let me tell you, this is the largest restaurant in Anhe town. If you don't have anything, even if you drink Mao Tai Wul Yan Jai, you can have it here. Chen Guzi's face turned cold. Tell me, what do you want? I don't like to drink liquor, I usually only drink Romani Conti, David said. What god? What is that? Chen Guzi was stunned. Seeing Chen Guzi like that, Sonia couldn't help laughing, and David just laughed without saying a word. Chen Guzi frowned, looked at the waiter beside him and said, what is he talking about? Does our hotel have it? The waiter shook his head, that's red wine, our hotel doesn't have it. It turned out to be red wine, what's so good about that stuff? It smells like swill. Chen Guzi looked disgusted, but then said to the waiter, we don't have any in the hotel, so go out and buy some more bottles come over. With that said, Chen Guzi took out a wad of money from his wallet and photographed it on the table. There were thousands of dollars. The waiter looked at the money, did not dare to take it, and was not moved. Damn, I told you to buy wine, didn't you hear? Seeing the waiter not moving, Chen Guzi was angry. Brother dog, the money is not enough. The waiter said quietly. How much is a bottle of red wine? I'll give you a few thousand more. Chen Guzi took out some money and slapped it on the table. But the waiter still didn't take it or move, which angered Chen Guzi and kicked the waiter fiercely. Brother go, the money is really not enough. I see if your kid doesn't understand that I don't understand, do you want to make money from it? Chen Guzi stood up at once. You don't have to force him, Anhe town doesn't have this wine, and the money is really not enough. A bottle of Romani Conti costs 300,000. David said to the Chen Guzi. How much? 300,000. Chen Guzi looked at David in shock, and then his face became angry. David, what are you pretending to be me here? You drink 300,000 bottles of wine? Blow it! Who doesn't know that you just got out of prison, thinking that you rent a Mercedes car, and you don't know where to find a lady to accompany the wine, so you can pretend to be a big money. If you are not Yingxia's cousin, I will tell you to get out of Anhe in minutes town. Hearing the words of Miss Peiju, Sonia's face suddenly turned cold. Xiao Chen, calm down. Aunt David hurriedly stood up, then looked at David and said, David, you just got out of jail, you didn't do well, and no one laughed at you, just find a good job in the future. They are all relatives, you don't have to pretend, and you drink 300,000 bottles of wine, why don't you drink 1,000,000? How can there be such an expensive wine in this world? David, shut your mouth and stop talking nonsense. Seeing that David's second aunt was a little angry, Barbara hurriedly said to David. Eldest sister, your David really needs to take care of it. What do you think he is pretending to be in front of us? I've watched him since I was a child. I don't know how much he weighs. When I come back this time, I don't want to let him. Now that we are developing so well here, we are still waiting for demolition, let Xiao Chen find him a good job, earn money to marry a wife and have a baby, and live a peaceful and stable life. Aunt David said to Barbara. We'll talk about this later, let's order food first. Barbara didn't want to talk about this topic, so she picked up the menu and said. Soon, he ordered a table of dishes and asked for a few bottles of white wine. Chen Guzi kept posing, just waiting for others to toast him. Xiao Chen, who is the manager Kui of the private room number 1 just mentioned? Aunt David asked towards Chen Guzi. Oh, then Manager Kui is a big man. He has the final say in the development of our Anhe town. Whoever's house will be valued and how much it will cost will be in his hands. He only needs to sign it, and it will be done. I am now pack some projects under him. Chen Guzi explained. Hey, that's really a big man. Let's see if you can talk to Manager Kui and find a job for David. After all, they are all relatives from now on. Aunt David is still worried about David's work. Chen Guzi glanced at David and snorted coldly, if I look at his attitude just now, I would be too lazy to care about him, but for Yingxia's face, I will tell Manager Kui. Chen Guzi said, stood up with a glass of wine, and then continued, I'll go next door to toast Manager Kui, you can drink it yourself. Chen Guzi left, and only David's family and his second aunt's family were left in the whole box. David, the second aunt's words are ugly, but it's all for your own good. Your parents don't have a job now, so they are counting on you to support them. If you are not motivated, who will your parents expect in the future? You said you came home. What's the use of renting a luxury car and a girlfriend? Is face so important to you? No one in the village knows that you have just come out of prison. Aunt David said to David bitterly. Second aunt, Mom? What are you talking about? Sister Sonia is really brother David's girlfriend. What is renting? Listen to Chen Guzi's nonsense. Chen Yingxia hurriedly said to her mother. Chen Yingxia knew that Sonia was definitely not rented by David, because no rented girlfriend would wear a big name, and the Cartier earrings given to her were very valuable, but Chen Guzi didn't know the goods and made a fuss. Second sister, Sonia is really David's girlfriend, we all know that. Barbara also hurriedly explained to Aunt David. When second Aunt David heard this, she immediately looked embarrassed and could only smile apologetically at Sonia. Sonia also smiled slightly, but didn't take it to heart, because she knew second Aunt David was also for David's good. David, if you have found such a good girlfriend, then you should work hard. I have heard from your mother long ago that you have no job right now. If Chen Go can find you one later, if you have a good job, you can do it well, although this place is not as good as the city of Horrendal, but there is still a bright future. Aunt David continued to persuade David. Second aunt, I understand what you are saying. I won't say it beforehand. Let's talk about Yingxia. David intends to tell a few elders about making Chen Yingxia regret his marriage. What's the matter with Yingxia? Second Aunt David asked with a puzzled look. Brother David, don't talk nonsense. Chen Yingxia's face changed suddenly with fright. David ignored Chen Yingxia, but continued to say to his second aunt, Yingxia is only 19 years old now, and it's too early to get married. Hey, you said that this child can't even go to school, so what if he doesn't get married? It's like this in the countryside, you can't compare with the city. Aunt David sighed and said. Where is Yingxia not going to school, that Chen Guzi was making trouble in the school, making the school not dare to welcome Xia, and he also used you as a threat, forcing Yingxia to have no choice, so he agreed to marry him. Who is Chen Guzi, don't you know? David said loudly. Hearing what David said, everyone was shocked, including David's parents, who all looked at Chen Yingxia. Yingxia, is everything David said true? Aunt David looked at Chen Yingxia and asked. Mom, don't worry about it, things have come to this time, it really doesn't matter anymore. Chen Yingxia said helplessly. Hey! Seeing Chen Yingxia like that, they all guessed that it must be true, so they all sighed. The matter is already like this, the wedding is set, what else can I do? Do you regret marriage? They don't dare, what kind of Chen Guzi is, they know too much. Second aunt, I plan to make Yingxia regret her marriage and send her to Horrendal to study. David said his plan. What are you joking about, repenting with Chen Guzi, isn't that courting death? Aunt David said in surprise. David, don't be fooled. You don't know who Chen Guzi is now. You did this, but you harmed your second aunt's family. Barbara also hurriedly said to David. Chen Baokuo, who had never spoken before, also said at this time, David, Chen Guzi is not as simple as you think, as the so-called strong dragon can't suppress the local snake, Don't think that you can settle it by knowing a few people in Horindal. Chen Guzi. Chen Baoqiao knew that David had something to do with him, and with the financial resources of Sonia's family, he must have a lot of power, but this is Anhui town, not Horindal, so Chen Guzi is not easy to mess with. I've decided on this matter, you don't have to worry about it. David had made up his mind a long time ago, and he couldn't even settle for a little BA5 TARD, that would be really ridiculous. Brother David, I know you're doing it for my own good, but I don't want to see you take risks, so don't worry about it. Chen Yingxia didn't want to let David take care of it, it really annoyed that Chen Guzi, he can do anything. Yingxia, you are only 19 years old now, do you really accept your fate like this? This is a lifetime thing, do you want to destroy yourself in the hands of Chen Guzi? You should go to school now, and find someone you like in the future. Love your boyfriend instead of compromising, your life is still very long, don't accept your fate, I can definitely help you, don't worry. David said loudly to Chen Yingxia. Chen Yingxia was silent, and everyone stopped talking. Indeed, Chen Yingxia is only 19 years old now, and there is still a long way to go in the future, so it cannot be destroyed by Chen Guzi. Hey! David's second uncle sighed and drank a glass of white wine in one gulp. There are parents who don't care about their children, but sometimes they have to accept the reality. There is no fairness in this world. The strong eat the weak, this is the law of survival. At this moment, Chen Yingxia's cell phone rang. After Chen Yingxia was connected, she hung up quickly, but her face was a little ugly. Yingxia, what's wrong? Aunt David asked with concern. Then Chen Guzi asked me to accompany the wine, I'm a little afraid. Chen Yingxia said with a look of fear. When Aunt David heard this, she stopped talking. What could she say at this time? If you don't let your daughter go there, it will be fun for Chen Guzi. Yingxia, I'll accompany you there, don't worry. David stood up and said. I'll go with you too, don't be afraid. Sonia also got up and said to Chen Yingxia. David, if you go, don't be impulsive, we'll have a long-term plan when we go back. Aunt David persuaded David. Second aunt, don't worry, I know what to do. David nodded and walked with Chen Yingxia to the private room number 1. Sonia has been comforting Chen Yingxia and telling her not to be afraid. As soon as I walked to the door of the private room number 1, I heard the noisy drinking sound from inside. David stepped forward and pushed open the box door. At this time in the box, 5 people were drinking, the master was a middle-aged man from the Mediterranean Sea, and Chen Guzi was sitting on the side, toasting with a flattering face. It seems that the middle-aged man in the Mediterranean is the manager Kui. David suddenly opened the door, and everyone in the private room was stunned. Chen Guzi glanced at David, as well as Chen Yingxia and Sonia behind David, and hurriedly said to the middle-aged man in the Mediterranean, Manager Kui, this is my daughter-in-law's cousin, he must know that Manager Kui is here, and he came here to make a toast. After Chen Guzi finished speaking, he hurriedly said to Chen Yingxia, Yingxia, come here and pour a glass of wine for Manager Kui. Chen Yingxia was trembling with fright. Sonia took Chen Yingxia's hand and felt that Chen Yingxia's hand was shaking so badly. Yingxia Xiao, ignorant, let me come. Sonia took the initiative to stand out, then picked up the liquor on the table and walked over. Seeing this, Chen Guzi raised the corner of his mouth. He was even more convinced of his guess. Sonia poured the wine so proactively. Seeing like this, she was not the escort girl? When Manager Kui saw Sonia, he narrowed his eyes, looked at Sonia squintingly, and then lifted the glass. Dog, who is this beautiful lady? Manager Kui asked Chen Guzi. Oh, it's my wife's cousin's girlfriend. Chen Guzi said hurriedly. He didn't dare to say that Sonia was an escort girl. After all, a big man like Manager Kui didn't like that kind of romantic girl for a long time, and he liked this even more. Where does Manager Kui work? Sonia asked while pouring wine for Manager Kui. Manager Kui is the manager of the SUA Group, and the SUA Group is the leading enterprise in Horondal. Without waiting for Manager Kui to say, Chen Guzi introduced with pride. Sonia raised the corner of her mouth and smiled coldly. She already knew that this place was developed by her own family, so she deliberately asked this question to see if this guy belonged to her own company. Miss, what's your name? Manager Kui looked at Sonia slyly and asked. My name is Sonia Su. Sonia said with a smile. Sonia. I saw that Manager Kui frowned slightly, but quickly said, it's really a good name, it's the same name as our eldest lady. There are too many people with the same name and surname now. What's the use? It's different. She is a wealthy eldest lady. Chen Guzi laughed. Then Manager Kui poured Sonia down the wine, and then continued to pick up the glass and said, the beauty pours the wine, it's a pleasure to drink, another drink. But this time, Sonia's face turned cold, and she threw it at Manager Kui. Manager Kui screamed and jumped up in a hurry, while Chen Guzi hurriedly wiped Manager Kui's clothes, then glared at Sonia and said, you fucking seek death, if you dare, sprinkle it on Manager Kui. Little girl, I think you don't want to live anymore. Manager Kui glared at Sonia. I don't think it's you who don't want to live. Let you come over to supervise the development and manage the company, but you are so virtuous, I think you have done it. As Sonia said that, she took out her mobile phone and called Ruben. You, what do you mean? Manager Kui was taken aback and asked Sonia. Nothing else, you take my family's money, but don't do anything real, I let my dad open you. Sonia said coldly. You, are you the eldest lady? Manager Kui's eyes instantly showed panic. Chen Guzi was also surprised, but then comforted the Manager Kui. Manager Kui, don't be afraid, she is definitely not the eldest miss of the Sua family, then David is a reform through labor prisoner who has just been released from prison. If she is the eldest of the Sua family miss, how is it possible to be with the prisoners of labor reform? I must have heard you say that she has the same name and surname as the eldest Miss Sua family, so I scare you. When Manager Kui heard this, he breathed a sigh of relief, and then looked at Sonia coldly. Little girl, if you have the ability, try to get on the phone, if you can't fire me today, I will let you serve me well for a few nights. Manager Kui, don't worry, I will arrange this, she can't escape. Chen Guzi hurriedly flattered. Chen Yingxia at the back was terrified. Although she knew that Sonia had some identity, she did not dare to associate Sonia with the eldest Miss Sua family. After all, how could she like David with her identity? Brother David. Chen Yingxia nervously grabbed David's arm. David smiled slightly, don't worry, because your sister-in-law is really the eldest miss of the Sua family. Chen Yingxia was stunned when she heard it. At this time, Sonia's phone was already open, so she said directly, Dad, did you arrange for a person named Kui to manage the development here in Anhe town? I don't know, it's all arranged by your Uncle Lu, what's wrong? Ruben asked with a puzzled look. During this time, Ruben has seldom managed the company's affairs, focusing on taking care of his body. If it wasn't for David last time, he would have lost his life. Don't worry, I'll call Uncle Lu. Sonia hung up the phone. At this time, Manager Kui's face was already ugly, because his immediate boss was indeed named Lu. Chen Guzi saw that Manager Kui looked bad, so he hurriedly comforted him, Manager Kui, don't be afraid, I think this little girl can act. However, Manager Kui ignored Chen Guzi and stared at Sonia with a cold sweat on his forehead. I saw Sonia dialed a number again, and soon a hearty voice came from the opposite side, eldest niece, why did you remember to call your Uncle Lu? This Uncle Lu was a veteran who followed Ruben to fight the country very early, and he was also one of Ruben's most trusted people, otherwise he would not be assured of handing over the company to him. But when Manager Kui heard the voice coming from the phone, his legs went weak and he collapsed. Hey, Manager Kui, are you all right? Chen Guzi, who was beside him, didn't realize what was going on, so he hurriedly supported Manager Kui and said. That Manager Kui was trembling and was speechless. Uncle Lu, did you arrange for a guy named Kui to take care of you in Anhe town? Sonia asked Uncle Lu. Yeah, what's wrong? Uncle Lu said. I fired him, this guy bullied me, forced me to pour him a drink, and wanted me to sleep with him. Sonia said angrily. What? This thing dares to let you pour him a drink and let you sleep with him. It's really fucking wrong. You wait for me to clean him up for you. Uncle Lu hung up the phone and called Manager Kui. Soon, Manager Kui's phone rang. Seeing his phone ringing, Manager Kui trembled and didn't dare to answer it. At this time, Chen Guzi also seemed to have discovered something, and looked at Sonia in surprise. Finally, Manager Kui answered the phone with trembling. Kui Balji, you fucking dare to ask the eldest lady to pour you wine and sleep with you, you are so fucking good. As soon as the phone was connected, Uncle Liu's roar came out. Lu, Mr. Lu, I don't know he's the eldest miss. Manager Kui wants to cry without tears at this time. Don't fucking say it, you were fired, I'll send someone to replace you tomorrow, you roll back for me to accept the punishment, and see if I don't break your leg. After Uncle Lu finished speaking, he immediately hung up the phone. Mr. Lu, President Lu. Then Manager Kui wanted to say something, but the other side was already busy. Sonia looked at Manager Kui with a half smile but said, Why, do you want me to accompany you? Pfft. Then Manager Kui suddenly knelt in front of Sonia, Miss, I was wrong, please forgive me, I was wrong. Bah, you scum, how could I spare you? Sonia spat fiercely. Manager Kui suddenly collapsed to the ground, his face ashen. When the few people who were drinking with them saw this, they ran away, and Chen Guzi also hid far away. Sonia turned around and walked out. When passing by Chen Yingxia, she smiled faintly, Yingxia, let's go. At this time, Chen Yingxia's eyes were still wide open, and she looked at Sonia with an incredible face. Miss Su, Chen Guzi also hurriedly followed. But Sonia ignored him, and then Chen Guzi directly took David's arm, Cousin, I really misunderstood just now, we are relatives now, how could I watch my relatives being bullied, you say this is Kui how to clean up, you just need a word, and I'll have someone chop him right away. Chen Guzi's effort to get down to the ground directly caused Manager Kui, who was sitting on the ground, to pass out angrily. David just gave Chen Guzi a cold look, ignored him, and went back to the second private room. That Chen Guzi didn't mind either, and followed closely behind. After entering the private room, Chen Guzi hurriedly opened the chair, Cousin, sit down. Seeing Chen Guzi being so polite to David, whether it is David's second aunt or Barbara, it feels very strange. After David sat down, he said coldly to Chen Guzi, how do you force my cousin to marry you? Chen Guzi was stunned for a moment, then licked his face and said, Cousin, what are you talking about? Yingxia and I are in free love, I didn't force him. Stop talking nonsense, your wedding with Yingxia is void, and Yingxia will not marry you. David said coldly. Cousin, this. Aren't you willing? David frowned. Chen Guzi gritted his teeth, glanced at Chen Yingxia, and finally nodded and said, Okay, the wedding is void, we won't get married. After that, Chen Guzi turned around and wanted to leave. Did I let you go? David asked. What else do you want? Chen Guzi's face was also a little ugly at this time. I cut off a hand myself, I will not pursue this matter. David said lightly. When Chen Guzi heard this, he was furious, David, don't go too far. David, forget it, since he promised not to get married, don't worry about it. When second aunt David heard this, she hurriedly persuaded David. Brother David, Forget it, if I don't get married, I'll be content. Chen Yingxia also persuaded David. After all, if Chen Guzi was in a hurry, he would dare to do anything. You don't have to worry about it. David finished speaking, looked at Chen Guzi and said, I'm just too much, what can you do? If you cut off a hand yourself, you can still save your life. If I do it, your life will be lost. Chen Guzi slapped the table suddenly. David, do you think you can do anything if you are a young lady on the list? This is Anhe town, and I can make you die without a single phone call, even if it is Su. What can my family do to me? I'm from Lord Hu of Horrendal, and I believe you must have heard the name of Lord Hu. Have you heard that the underground emperor of Horrendal? David nodded. You're still a little knowledgeable, so don't push me too hard, otherwise no one can keep you. Chen Guzi said with a cold smile. I don't need someone to protect me, I just need to protect myself. Keep one hand, get out, or you will die. David said calmly. Damn, I'll give you a face. Chen Guzi scolded angrily, picked up the wine bottle and smashed it at David. But before he could make a move, David grabbed the bottle of wine as soon as he reached out his hand, and then smashed it on Chen Guzi's head. Chen Guzi's head was suddenly bleeding, and he sat on the ground with a scream. This time, everyone was startled. As long as Sonia smiled, she was not worried at all. You fucking wait for me! Chen Guzi roared, took out his phone and started calling. Your name is a man, so I'll call him too. Don't you know Lin Tianhu? I'll ask him if he knows you. David said, took out his mobile phone. Humph, you are a little white-faced, and you deserve to know Hu Ye. Even if you are the boss of the Su group, Hu Ye will not ignore him. Chen Guzi snorted coldly. David ignored him, but called Lin Tianhu directly. Mr. Chen, Lin Tianhu was in the provincial capital and got the call right away. There is a man named Chen Go in Anhe town. He said he knew you and was your subordinate. Do you know him? David asked. Anhe town. Lin Tianhu pondered for a while. I don't know, I will take care of the place below Horrendal. Ask your subordinates, who knows this Chen Go, and now this kid is using the name of Juyatang to make a fortune. David said coldly. Okay, I'll check right away. After Lin Tianhu finished speaking, he hung up the phone and hurriedly checked. Soon, Lin Tianhu called back, Mr. Chen, I asked, and Biozi said he knew someone from Anhe town named Chen Go, but he didn't know him very well. Biozi. David remembered, this Biozi is the cousin of his classmate Yuan Hua, who cut off a hand at that time. I'll send you the location and let him come and handle it in person. After David finished speaking, he sent Lin Tianhu a location. David, have you finished pretending? I'm telling you, my people will be here soon, so just wait to die. Chen Guzi said viciously. David ignored him, but said to his second aunt's family and his parents, let's eat, ignore him. But now in this situation, who can eat it? David, let's go. David's second aunt said with a face full of fear. Go, none of you want to go. Chen Guzi stood at the door and roared loudly. We don't have to go, let's talk after dinner, second aunt, don't be afraid. David persuaded his second aunt. But no matter how David persuaded, no one was in the mood to eat. After more than 20 minutes, there was a sudden chaotic footsteps rushing upstairs from downstairs. My people are here, you wait for me. Chen Guzi looked proud. This time, Aunt David's family as well as Barbara and Chen Baokuo's faces changed color. Soon, more than a dozen people rushed in with sticks, all of them tattooed and menacing. Brother dog, who messed with you? One of them asked Chen Guzi. Take a good look at this place, and no one is allowed to let go. I will start killing people today. Chen Guzi had a grim expression, then looked at Sonia and said, Miss Su, you'd better get out of the way, don't splatter your blood for a while, don't interfere in this matter, I believe your Sua family doesn't want to be with the tiger either. Is the Lord the enemy? I don't care. Sonia shook her head. Chen Yingxia looked at Sonia in shock. Sister-in-law, you can't ignore it, or my brother will die. Don't worry, your brother is very lucky. Sonia said with a smile. This time, Chen Yingxia was a little dumbfounded. If Sonia doesn't care about David, then what kind of backing does David have? Aunt David didn't know what to do at this time, so she could only follow Chen Guzi. Xiao Chen, I apologize to you for David, don't go away. Chen Guzi pushed Aunt David aside. David hurriedly helped his second aunt, and then looked at Chen Guzi coldly and said, You have lost the last hope of life, so do it yourself. Don't fucking bluff me, I'm scared. Chen Guzi didn't care at all, and shouted loudly, Aren't you arrogant and also called people? Where are your people? My people will be here soon. David said lightly. Okay, I'll give you 10 minutes, and I'll wait for your people to come. I'd like to see who dares to oppose me in Anhe town. Chen Guzi moved a chair and sat down, snorted coldly. Soon, 10 minutes later, Chen Guzi looked at David with a sneer, I think you are just bragging, where are your people? But as soon as Chen Guzi finished speaking, he felt the ground shaking, and the whole building seemed to start shaking. Brother dog, there are a lot of people outside. At this time, a younger brother said to Chen Guzi. Chen Guzi was startled, and hurriedly looked through the window, and found that there was a crowd of people, and the entire restaurant had been surrounded. Chen Guzi was shocked, but he calmed down quickly, and said to the somewhat flustered younger brother, Don't worry, it doesn't matter how many people come, I am covered by Tiger Lord, who dares to touch me. After Chen Guzi finished speaking, the sound of footsteps came, and someone hurried upstairs. Brother Biao. Chen Guzi was stunned when he saw the person coming. The person who came was Biozi with a broken left hand. At this time, Biozi had a solemn expression on his face. He didn't even look at Chen Guzi, but walked directly to David and respectfully shouted, Mr. Chen. Now Biozi is extremely frightened. His left hand was cut off because he offended David. Now Lin Tianhu has rushed him here again. When Chen Guzi saw that Biozi treated David so respectfully, he was dumbfounded. Biozi, do you know this guy? David pointed at Chen Guzi and asked. No, but not very familiar. Biozi said truthfully. I don't want to see him anymore, as for the others, broken legs. As soon as David's voice fell, Chen Guzi fell to his knees at once. As soon as Chen Guzi knelt down, his men all knelt down. David. No, big brother, dad, grandpa. Grandpa David, I beg you, spare my life. Chen Guzi desperately kowtowed to David. Chen Guzi, didn't you say that you belong to Lin Tianhu? Now that his people are here, what about your arrogance? David sneered. Grandpa David, I was wrong, I was wrong. Chen Guzi kept begging for mercy. David snorted coldly, turned around, and Biozi flashed a cold light in his eyes, took out a dagger and stabbed at Chen Guzi. Don't scare my family. David said lightly. Understood, Mr. Chen. Biozi nodded, and then said to his subordinate, drag these people to the next door. Soon, there was a burst of mourning from the next door. David's second aunt's family was blinded at this time, and Chen Yingxia's eyes widened, looking at David in disbelief. On the way back, Aunt David looked at David and seemed to have something to say, but she didn't say anything in the end. Early the next morning, David was going to take Chen Yingxia to Horindal to go to school. Because David really has a lot of things to do now, otherwise he would stay with his parents in his hometown for a longer time. At the same time, the village also started broadcasting, saying that the houses of each family will be re-evaluated, and this time they will be demolished according to national standards, and there will be no forced demolition or malicious price reduction. Every household in Chinjia village is excited. David took Chen Yingxia to Horindal, and through Ling Zhengquan's relationship, he found a high school for Chen Yingxia to study at. David and Sonia accompanied Reuben in Horindal for one day, and then went straight to the provincial capital the next day. The Yaoang Mansion and Suanya Valley have not been dealt with, and David has not investigated the matter of Hongshan Lingxi, so he does not dare to stay in Horindal for a long time. I'm sorry, I made you run around with me, I can't be at home with my father. On the way, David followed Sonia apologetically. Marry a chicken, follow a chicken, marry a dog, follow a dog, marry a grasshopper, who makes me like you? Sonia smiled lightly. David also smiled with love on his face. Don't worry, I will give you a stable life soon, the two of us have been living for hundreds of years, and let you give me 100 children. Bah, I won't give birth to you so much, and I'm not a pig. Sonia rolled her eyes at David. Kyoto, White House. Bai Zhantang was standing beside him with a low expression on his face, and there were 6 or 7 people sitting in the hall at this time. Zhantang, tell me what happened in Jiangbei in detail. Above the main seat, an old man with a grey beard said. This old man is Bai Ziashan, the head of the Bai family. Okay, Grandpa. Bai Zhantang nodded, and then continued. A young man in his 20s came out of Jiangbei, called David, who is very powerful. At this martial arts gathering, he easily killed Zhang Zhend. And the Master Qin Feng brought, all of them were easily killed, and this person can also refine pills. His pill recipe is very mysterious, and the people in Yaoangfu have no way to know the refining method with pills. The most important thing is the jade pendant of the Yin family. Now it's in the hands of David. At that time, it was to compete for the jade pendant. Those people from the Qin family were killed. Fortunately, I was alert and saw that things were not going well, so I didn't conflict with him. But this David wants the Yaoangfu to hand over all the medicinal materials, otherwise, the Yaoangfu will be flattened. Just after Bai Zhantang finished speaking, there was a lot of discussion. So young, with such strength, isn't this a genius? Zhantang, are you investigating this kid? Bai Zhan, Bai Zhantang's father, asked. Dad, I've checked, all the resumes of that kid are here. Bai Zhantang said, took out some documents and distributed them to several people present. Everyone looked at the document and frowned, because David's resume was blank from childhood to adulthood, and he didn't even have experience in martial arts. How could he suddenly become so powerful? Dad, look at it. Bai Zhan took the document to Bai Ziashan, and then said with a puzzled face, this kid has a mediocre resume. He has been in prison for 3 years, shouldn't he have such strong strength? Bai Ziashan looked at the document, quickly saw the problem, and said to everyone, didn't you find out, after this David got out of the prison, his life has undergone tremendous changes. It is very likely that this kid has been in prison for 3 years. Adventure. Adventures? What can I do in 3 years? I'm afraid I can't even practice Qi. Bai Zhan frowned. Qi Jin. Bai Ziashan smiled slightly, I'm sure that David is not practicing Qi Jin, he is not a martial artist. Bai Ziashan's words made everyone stunned and looked at Bai Ziashan with a puzzled face. Grandpa, is he a warlock? If he can make alchemy, he is likely to be a warlock. Bai Zhantang asked. Impossible, even if the warlock is skilled, but like you said, when David dealt with Zhang Zhend and the Grand Masters of the Qin family, he didn't use any magic, it was all close combat, how could it be possible? It's a warlock. Bai Zhan immediately retorted. Bai Zhantang thought about it, and it was indeed the case, so he could only look at Bai Ziashan. It seemed that Bai Ziashan knew something. Seeing everyone looking at him, Bai Ziashan asked, apart from knowing that there are warriors and warlocks in this world, do you know there are other types of people? Everyone shook their heads. I tell you, there are not only warriors and warlocks in this world, but also a kind of person who is a monk, but such people are extremely rare. This David is likely to be a monk. As soon as Bai Ziashan's voice fell, everyone was stunned. Grandpa, what is a monk? Bai Zhantang asked. It's an immortal cultivator. Bai Ziashan said. Suddenly there was a hint of envy and yearning in his eyes. Immortal cultivator. Everyone exclaimed in surprise. Grandpa, you said that David is an immortal? Are there really immortals in this world? Bai Zhantang was the most excited. If there really was an immortal in the world, would he also have the opportunity to become an immortal and be able to live forever? To be precise, he is just a cultivator, and he has not yet become an immortal. I don't know if there are immortals in this world, but I know that there are a group of immortal cultivators, but these people are hidden in the downtown area and never expose themselves, so very few people know about them. Bai Ziashan explained. Dad, how did you know there were immortal practitioners? Bai Zhan asked. Bai Ziashan suddenly looked out of the window, and then clearly remembered his memories, and began to slowly say, the jade pendant of the Yin family is actually the spiritual tool of the cultivator. I remember that I was only in my early 20s, young and energetic, and always wanted to worship high. People are teachers, so I went out to sea with the Yin family boy, thinking that there will be real masters on the island. However, after a day and a night of sailing at sea, a storm suddenly hit the two of us, and the two of us were washed up on a deserted island, and the boat was stranded. Or when the tide is high, we can go back. I have been on the island for 7 days, the food is good, but the fresh water is gone. We are both dying of thirst, and we are about to die of thirst, but God blesses, it suddenly rains, and we are both happy to collect rainwater. But it was soon discovered that something was wrong, because it was only raining on this island, and there was no rain at all in other places, and there were lightning strikes from time to time, and there were bursts of strange sounds. The two of us searched for the sound, and finally, behind a rock, we saw two people fighting. The scene at that time was simply too shocking. I saw one person holding a weapon similar to a big axe. There will be a lightning strike, and the rocks will fly, just like a god descending to earth. And the person on the other side is really holding a flute, and every time it hits the lightning, it makes a rumbling explosion. I have never seen such a fight, it is not a mortal fight at all, it is too scary. It's gone. The two of us were lying on the back of the stone, and neither of us dared to move. It was not until there was no movement that we dared to look up and found that the two of us had long since disappeared. The scene was a mess, and in the rubble, the Yin family boy picked up that jade pendant, it must have been dropped by one of the two people. We both know that the jade pendant must be a treasure. Later, when the tide rose, we sailed back again. At that time, I also wanted to get the jade pendant, so I sneaked up on the boy of the Yin family, but I didn't want the jade pendant to flash a red light, and directly put me it was knocked out. When the Yin family boy saw this, he directly regarded the jade pendant as a family heirloom. Everyone listened to Bai Ziashan's memories and fell into deep thought. They had never heard Bai Ziashan talk about this incident. Grandpa, then why are you so sure that those two are immortal cultivators? Bai Zhantang asked in confusion. After I came back, I rummaged through the ancient books and found it. There are still immortal cultivators in this world. What was the fighting situation between those two people at that time if it was not an immortal cultivator? Bai Ziashan explained. Bai Zhantang stopped talking, then thought for a moment and said, I don't know if David is a cultivator, but that jade pendant is definitely a treasure. At that time, Qin Feng and I shot at the girl wearing jade pendant, and the result was a flash of red light. We both flew out. Bai Ziashan's eyes lit up, then David seems to be a cultivator without a doubt, that UPI has not been activated in the Yin family for decades, but when it came to David, he immediately activated it once, then David must know about UPI secret. It hasn't been activated for decades. Bai Zhantang asked in surprise.